Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to another Zoom presentation hosted by the University of Aruba Center for Lifelong Learning. My name is Deborah Alexander. I'm the coordinator for the Center for Lifelong Learning, for those who don't know me. Today we're having our second session with a wonderful team from the Saxion Hogeschool University of Applied Sciences in the Netherlands, where we're looking at the National Integrity System Assessment of Aruba. For those of you who missed last week's session, this one will be made available at a later date. And next week is our final session, but we're glad to have you with us here today. So I won't talk too much, which I normally do, but I just wanted to remind everyone that please use the chat box to say good morning, let us know who you are, where you're working, and use specifically the Q&A box for your questions, which will be answered at the end of the presentation. Feel free to ask these questions in English or Dutch. As I said last week, Thomas, his papiermento is a bit rusty, but he will try, but it would be for the larger scope, it would be ideal if it's English or Dutch. Without further ado, I'd like to hand the word over now to Frank.
Maybe we can reconsider that.
Okay.
Due to the fact that Willeke just entered.
Yeah.
So maybe you can start off, Willeke.
I will, yeah.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah. So good morning to all of you, those who joined us last week and those who are in new. My name is Willeke Slingeland. I'm a professor of applied research at Saxion. And our research group is all about integrity and integrity-related topics. And the reason I'm a few minutes late is actually that there's a lot of integrity issues in the Netherlands as well. So I just had a meeting with a lot of different municipalities from the Netherlands, talking about their integrity issues and what the role of the major is and how should we already prevent integrity issues in terms of the elections which are coming up. So having said that, I think integrity is a topic which is relevant to any country. And from Saxion, my colleagues who are here today, Esther, Thomas and Frank, and Ben, who is actually lecturing now, but who is also working on the National Integrity System. We are very pleased to work together with the University of Aruba on this National Integrity System assessment, which hopefully gives a lot of reasons to think through how integrity is a very important value and how all institutions play a role in observing the integrity of an entire country. So we mentioned last week, but I would like to mention again that we have on average, I think 10 years of experience in these fields, and integrity is too often considered as an isolated topic, whether a person is acting with integrity or whether the conduct is, so to speak, transparent, honest, and acting with integrity. While the National Integrity System, as we will present it based partly today, is looking at it from a system approach. And we were very pleased that the country of Aruba, your government, together with the Stichting Deugdelijk Bestuur Aruba, finally also asked for a research into the National Integrity System. And the reason I'm so pleased is that we've carried out a similar research in the Netherlands, and actually it highlights the strengths and the rooms for improvement of each country. And we carried this NIS in the Netherlands and carried it out in 2012. And actually, a lot of good recommendations were adopted by all stakeholders. So partly by the legislator, but also by civil society organizations. So knowing what Aruba is going through at the time, knowing what the world is going through at the time, especially in times of economic crisis, it's important to think about the quality of government, to think about good governance. So I think the timing is right, and Aruba can be one of the 100+ countries who've carried out their national integrity system. And you see on the right-hand side, you see actually all the images of those stakeholders involved at the beginning of this important research. So besides the country Aruba, the Stichting Deugdelijk Bestuur Aruba, Saxion University and the University of Aruba, I should mention, of course, the founding fathers of integrity research, which is Transparency International. And those of you who do not know Transparency International, you have to check their website. It's a very professional international organization, anti-corruption watchdog, which has carried out several topics, research-related topics, like on lobbying, on revolving door matters, on sound financial sector. And the NIS tool, I think, is a great tool because Transparency International used to launch, and it still does, every year its corruption perception index, and you might have seen it. It's often abbreviated as the CPI, and this is a long ranking list of countries and the perceptions from civil servants' perspective how corrupt this country is. So you have 1 to 160, and you list countries, but it's a perception research. And although perceptions should always also be evaluated, we always try to not only isolate at corruption, and we also want to focus on the entire system of a country, which is a more promising, hopeful outlook on integrity-related issues. So although the CPI has been valuable, it is perception, and it's just a matter of where is your country ranked. And it doesn't actually give recommendation on how to improve, how to change its order. And that's when the NIS comes into place. So the NIS is a research which is using the system approach. And what we actually have done so far is try to, of course, from remotely here from the Netherlands, try to work with people, experts from Aruba, to see what the NIS in Aruba looks like. And it has been challenging. I already mentioned that COVID-19 has shown us the enormous differences in terms of quality of governments across the world. So I guess you could say that those countries who have been hit the most by COVID-19 are the countries where, where integrity is still not guaranteed. So the best way to prevent any future consequences of pandemics like COVID-19, the serious impact it has on welfare and economics, is investing in good governance and investing in a national integrity system. So initially, our research group was supposed to meet with some of you who are here today, with students from the University of Aruba, and to actually do interviewing, because we want to hear from you. What are your experiences? What kind of institution do you work? What is there in place in terms of integrity policies? And more importantly, what does the real life look like in terms of rules implementation? So we were supposed to travel to Aruba, but of course also COVID-19 made it impossible. So ever since, we have been working from home, trying to understand the features of the national integrity system of Aruba. And well, I think University of Aruba was very helpful, and students carried out research also from their houses to give us a bit of idea on the basic legal framework from several institutions. So we were also supposed to present in Aruba, but because that all was impossible, we decided to do these 3 webinars. And you might have seen it if you joined last week, otherwise you will see it at the end slide of this presentation. This webinar is meant to give you some ideas of what we found so far, but also to ask you to give us data, to give us information from your perspective as an expert or working in operational side of one of the institutions. So that's why we say you are invited. Our email address, we have an email address for this NIS research, which will be there in the final slide of this presentation. So feel free either today during the webinar by using the chat, or otherwise we will share it with you later on. Yes, Deborah. So once again, I want to show you the what the NIS actually looks like. And I mentioned the systemic approach or holistic approach in terms of how do we assess national integrity system. Every country should be assessed by using this research methodology from Transparency International by, first of all, looking at the political, institutional, the social political, and the social economic foundation, because this is already a very basic fundament on how all the institutions established actually function. So of course there needs to be finances, and there needs to be a wider set of norms of morality within the society before you can actually establish well-functioning institutions. So these basic foundations are important, and therefore we assess also these foundations of Aruba to understand what is the history of the country, what is the economic look like, what are these social groups, socio-economic groups within the Aruba society. So this gives us some perspective on how should we assess these various institutions. And I'm particularly fond of this holistic approach because I think it gives you an idea of how the country actually makes sure that everything is related. So if we establish institutions like you see them here, last week we mentioned the legislator and the executive. Today we will discuss the judiciary and law enforcement. All these institutions have a unique role to play. So this is something which we as human beings, as society, decided a long time ago. So that actually we have those who make the laws, who execute the laws. We have those, of course, who make sure that there's law enforcement, and there's the judiciary. But also, normally a country should have also an ombudsman and an audit institution. So these institutions together make up a national integrity system. And of course, if they all fulfill their role and the basic foundations are good, we speak of a strong integrity system. And again, this is not a position for any country in which you can say, okay, everything is great, we're fine, because integrity is not a static term, it's a dynamic term. So we should always reinvest in integrity. So every time things change because of technology, because of recession. So every once in a while, you should explore what the national integrity system looks like. If it functions well, you can see the 3 bullets on the roof of the integrity system, that if we have a strong integrity system, we also think that the consequences are that rule of law is being observed, that we can think of a country as exploring in a sustainable way. And most importantly, there's good quality of life, because countries who have a poor integrity system have a poor quality of life. So welfare, infrastructure, education, they're all suffering because money is lost, money is not allocated in the right way. So that's why we think an integrity system is a good way of assessing a country, in contrary to all these other integrity and corruption instruments, which are also valuable, but which are having a single message, either how are you ranked in these indexes. Yes, Deborah. So how actually have we assessed the integrity system so far? Well, actually, we use the methodology of Transparency International. And those of you who are interested, on the website of Transparency International, they have a NIS toolkit, and you can actually go and see the methodology which we use. So it's open source, it's open available. So actually, you could be our shadow researchers if you would like. So each of these pillars, you've seen there are 12 pillars in an integrity system. Each of these pillars has 3 sets of values, of 5 sets of values, which we assess. So, and they're all distinguished into indicators. So first of all, for every single pillar, we will assess the capacity. So what resources are legally guaranteed, and are they actually available in practice? What is the independence of this institution legally? Of course, is it in the constitution? Is it in its own laws? And how is it observed into practice? So here we always will make a law and practice comparison. The second aspect which we will assess is the transparency, accountability, and integrity mechanisms, which are part of the indicator on governance. So we will see how transparent is this institution, what it should it do have in place, and actually does it observe the transparency norms. And the same goes for accountability and integrity mechanisms. And the last part, of course, I have to see is role. So what role, how do you carry out your role, and what do you do in terms of reform? So if all these indicators are more or less moderate or good, well, then it's heading in the way of a strong integrity system. And I already highlighted that an integrity system is never finished, it's never finalized. So you should always think, how is the current situation changing and what should we maybe adapt? So I already mentioned the role of technology. Does that give calls for a new set of laws? So that's what we've seen, and we see a lot of laws being made also in Aruba. And of course, we take note of what is already going on, and we highlight how these laws help with strengthening the institutions. Yes. So I'm giving now the floor to Frank, who has been involved in the research on the institution judiciary. And I already saw one of the questions popping in on the chat on how should we contact you. At the final slide of this presentation, there's an email address in which you can contact us. So you will see it, and the PowerPoints will be sent as well. Thank you, Frank.
Okay, thank you, Willeke. My name is Frank Diepermaat. I'm working as a lecturer and researcher within the Department of Law of the School of Governance Law and Urban Development of Saxion, which is a school in the east part of the Netherlands. As Willeke was telling you, I am involved within this project. Last week, in last week's webinar, we had a look at two of the pillars which were shown to you a few moments ago. We discussed the legislative and the executive branch. Today, we will focus on two other pillars. As you can see, the judiciary, and from there, I would like to talk you through the law enforcement agencies. On judiciary, our colleague Ben Tuinder is the person who was conducting the research. And I would like to express also gratitude to one of our students, Romy Rutgers. She conducted part of the research even before our summer break. She wrote her bachelor's thesis on this aspect, the judiciary on Aruba. Some of the preliminary findings. First, some remarks on structure and organization. As you can see, Ben has been focusing on the Joint Court of Justice, where he looked at the status and the position of this institution within your constitution. It's important to note that Joint Court of Justice takes care of the organization and the administration of justice, both in first instance and in appeal, in civil, criminal, and administrative matters, including also tax law. In this first part of the presentation, you will miss the role of the Public Prosecutor's Office, Openbaar Ministerie. We will save that part for later as we discuss the role of law enforcement agencies. With that, we also can make some remarks on the Supreme Court of the Netherlands, the Hoge Raad. I will do that on the next slide. In this slide, you will not find any remarks on your court of first instance, het gerecht van eerste aanleg. And I would like to start off there, because that is the court that is situated on your island, as it is also situated, or there's also same sort of institution situated on other islands. like Aruba, Curacao, Sint Maarten, and Bonaire for the remaining islands. And it is especially this institution which is of importance to you because most of the cases are brought there. And there, those are looked at by a single judge. That's also important to take into account. If we take it back to your joint court of justice, we can place a remark that says that it's the main body of appeal, with some exceptions where the Court of Justice is also the court of first instance. But I will leave that in this presentation. Deborah, please, can you take it to the next slide? Thank you. My colleague Ben has been focusing on the Joint Court of Justice, mainly by looking at its tasks and authorities as laid down in your kingdom, as laid down in the Kingdom Act Joint Court of Justice. I would like to make some remarks here on our Supreme Court, the Hoge Raad. The main observation we can make here is that in that relation between the Joint Court of Justice and the Hoge Raad, the idea of concordance is really, really important, because within that kingdom where we have different sets of legal rules, we have to make sure that there's some common ground in interpretation of the rules. But in a practical sense, that can cause some distress from time to time too, because the question might be that the interpretation by that Supreme Court, the question might be if that outcome, the interpretation, whether that is suitable for your for the situation, especially on that island in the Caribbean. So on the one hand, it's important to find common ground, and it's important to pay attention to that idea of concordancy. But at the same time, we fully understand that from time to time that might be difficult as well, because finding common ground, even though the situation on the several islands and that part overseas here in Europe might be slightly different. Some remarks on the judges. Deborah, can you please take it one step back? Yeah, sorry. I was saving my breath and I was slipping one slide towards to the other. It's important to be aware of the fact that judges are appointed for life. You can find it in the royal decree, and there's one important exception to that rule. The judges coming from the Netherlands, they are appointed for life, but not in Aruba. They are served there. They are appointed for a short period, a period from 3 to 5 years. And the reasons for that are clear. It all has to do with independence. But once more, we can ask ourselves the question whether that's the full story. Those judges are leaving your island after 5 years. And well, if I try to imagine how life in a society like in Aruba is, I can imagine that your understanding of that society, the couleur locale, just comes after 3 to 5 years. So if we take into account that 70% of the judges within that court of justice is coming from the Netherlands, we can see that great influence. At the same time, we can see that there is the wish to attract more judges from your own country, Caribisering, but it isn't that successful as we have been seen thus far. Probably that has to do with this, the size of the island and also the idea of impartiality. Deborah. Here we have a polling question. We would like you to answer the following question. And there are just two options. Whether you agree or disagree, judges from the Netherlands should be appointed for a longer period than 3 to 5 years. Nee. Als je het, ja, dan
Yes, I think we have 10 more seconds before the polling ends. Yes, and here we are.
I'm not too sure whether you are able to see the score as attendee, but it's more like a 50-50 result. So a slight majority is in favor, so they agree on this poll. Judges should remain in Aruba a little longer. But as I said, probably we can find arguments for both sides. On the one hand, the idea of independence, well, that's the whole idea behind that transfer after 3 to 5 years. But I can imagine the situation where you, as people from the island, might be in favor of judges staying a little longer because they learn to understand your society. So as I could see in the chat, Mr. Beaujon says it's a good idea, the idea to appoint those judges for 3 to 5 years, but just give them the possibility for an extension. And Ms. Steenvoorde Laclay, she adds to that that impartial period, it's important, but that doesn't have to do anything with your country of origin. Thank you. Maybe we can, we can take it a step further. Ben, he identified some strengths. As you can see, he is positive on the legal framework. According to him, it can be described as solid, And there he focused mainly on your constitution and on the Kingdom Act. So the position of the judiciary and the legal framework on which it's based can be regarded as solid. And with that, there are some legal guarantees of integrity. So guarantees on integrity on the side of the judge. And he added, even though a few rules on integrity can be added, I will talk to you on that in a second on the next slide. Also, he's very positive on the publication of documents, annual reports, and the fact that websites are up to date. Later on, I would like to talk to you with about the law enforcement agencies. And there I draw a very different conclusion, because Ben, he is really enthusiastic about publication, let's say, for this branch, the judiciary. When it's about the law enforcement agencies, I come to another conclusion, but I will point that out later. Let's shift our attention to some matters of priority. Thank you, Deborah. Even though there are some legal guarantees of integrity when it's regarding the judges, some aspects can be added. As you can see here, on the disclosure of the financial interests of judges. No such regulation is present in Aruba. And if we think about the position of judges, their position towards the public, the question might be whether judges can be coming into a situation where conflicts of interest may arise. So it might be sensible to create some legislation, some regulations in which judges have to disclose their financial interests, so that the people are also aware to pinpoint conflicts of interests when they occur. With that, some regulations on the providing of judicial information, for instance, when judges are appointed, those are lacking too. But overall, we can be positive on legal guarantees towards the integrity of judges. One aspect that is lacking is the possibility to file complaints on judges to an independent body. If people want to complain, they can do so, but they have to address that complaint, they have to file that to the board. So the board of the executive board of the courts. Then Ben identified some bottlenecks, as he described it, and I would like to talk you through those. The first one he identified is about financial and human resources, and his conclusion thus far is that those appear to be inadequate. Budgets for the Joint Court of Justice, they are not allocated fully or not in time. And with that, he found out that the quality of the legal support within the court it can be considered limited. And that is the reason why several trainings are offered to the staff, to the personnel of the court. From there, we can see a remark on the accessibility of information for the people, for the civilians. And probably that has to do with the language barrier. The question is, of course, whether the people in Aruba do master the Dutch language, because that is the language which is used in the verdicts of the judge. Probably the most interesting one is his observation that the execution of verdicts which are unfavorable to the government cause problems from time to time. Here we can have a look at the Aruba BirdLife Conservation Foundation case, which is about your Bubali wetlands. In this case, that Conservation Foundation started proceedings against the Minister of Infrastructure because there were some plans to start construction works which was not compatible with the spatial development plan for that region. So those wetlands were described as green areas which need to protect it. That idea was also let me phrase that sentence a little bit others, a little bit otherwise. When that Conservation Foundation found out that construction work was planned, it brought the case to the court, and there the court was quite clear, and they threw the whole idea about construction work aside. And there the government does not seem to have the intention to protect those wetlands, because that Conservation Foundation had to file several complaints, but also had to start several lawsuits for the court, because the government was changing its plans, but in the end, they were not respecting that green area, the protection of nature reserves. Another case which can be pinpointed is a case of the director of public health, the director of the public health department, who had a situation with his Minister of Health, Tourism and Sport. It was all about the dysfunction of this person. At the end of the day, this case was brought to the court. The court ordered that this director needs to be re-employed, but later on, in practice, several efforts were made for that director to make it him fast impossible to perform his duties. So just two examples in which we can see that the court order and the acts of the government, so two pillars of that trias politica, do not always match. From here, the last remark on this slide, and probably you can be, you can think of this yourself as well. Within that court of first instance, we have the situation that a single judge has to come to conclusions. So singular jurisprudence. Ben found some risks, possible integrity risks, as he describes it, especially within a community, a society, which is of approximately 100,000 people. There are close relations between people and other people that are judges, of course. So a potential risk is that that singular judge can be let me find a proper word, that singular judge, yeah, well, of course, to stress it, he can be bribed. And it's not always a matter of bribery, but if there are personal relations, the integrity of the judge might be at stake. So from here to a next polling question. The judiciary in Aruba can sufficiently fulfill its task within the trias politica. So if we think of the judiciary, the executive, and the legislature, can the judiciary perform its task sufficiently? So 4 options. The first one in which you agree, the last one where you disagree, and then we have those 2 options B and C. The first one is about the position of the judiciary towards the legislature, and C is about the position of the judiciary and the executive. Once more, we have an outcome in which all the options are chosen, but the majority chose option C. So that is about the position of the judiciary towards the executive, like in those 2 examples Ben described. So the Aruba BirdLife Conservation Foundation, and also the situation where the Minister of Health, Tourism and Sport had a pending case with a director of the Public Health Department. Thank you. I'm just checking the chat to see whether people are adding comments. Ling Wong says it's in the executive, where the ultimate decisions are made in our system. Probably in the Netherlands, the situation is roughly the same. It's important to note that those decisions can be brought to an independent and impartial judge. Thomas.
Yes, Frank, thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Thomas Riebesma. I already introduced myself last week. This is actually an interesting point, and Ling also brings up the issue that the executive should be strengthened. Actually, we found in the interviews with diverse respondents that they all mentioned the fact that the follow-up in the triage lacks strength. So that's a point. First of all, in the case that Frank already explained, those environmental cases, he mentioned Bubali Plus, but you can also mention Arie Kok. Probably spearfishing will be an issue. And in that sense, the judge fulfills a clear buffer function. Looks at the law from the continental system, what we have in Europe, but that's the same in Aruba. There's also a question about that in the polling. So not having a common law system. And what the judge consequently does is instructing the minister to follow the rule of law. And what respondents often mention is that consequently, the minister tries, sometimes quite arbitrarily, to reach his goal through another political move, another way. So it's very hard to pull it out of the political sphere. So strengthening the executive in this field might be a bit troublesome. Parliament should be correcting if we talk about the trias politica, but the respondents also mentioned that it does not always, and in the majority of the cases, not correct the executive power in that field. I can also mention two other fields of law. So these environmental cases are civil, are administrative law, but this also takes place in civil law. Frank already mentioned the fact that there is a number of dismissal cases, ontslagzaken, and that can be after a change of government, but often it can also be an individual case. Judge corrects the case, says what is the system of law and why the dismissal is arbitrary, unreasonable, redelijk ontslag in Dutch. So it should be corrected, goes back to the executive. And then you should have a system that the check by the judiciary is corrected by the executive and also controlled by parliament. In that field, it doesn't work. And could it be improved, to say it simple? And a third case, I think I can also address, in which the judiciary checks in the system is in the criminal field. So we take the Ibis case, a very important case on the island, big case of corruption. And we see is that the judge motivates in detail special features, special factors that take place on the island, stresses the small scale of Aruba, stresses certain cultural behavior that in some circles is considered to be the common morality, and subsequently says that that behavior is not accepted under criminal law, and that morality should be changed. And what respondents say is then it lacks in follow-up. There should be a move from out the executive that discusses that change in morality in a broader field. University of Aruba stipulates it, but that is also a factor that can be improved. So, in short, the trias. I'm done.
Okay, from here to another poll question. The level of integrity of the judges in Aruba can be described as, and we come up with 4 options. So the level of integrity of the judges is high, fair, moderate, or low. Okay, thank you. Once more, we can see that the majority of you consider the judges, the level of integrity as fair. So of course there might be some room for improvement, but overall, I must say, people are satisfied. That's the way, at least, I understand this score. From here, we want to highlight the situation regarding the law enforcement agencies. So we are going to leave the trias politica. We discussed legislature, executive, and judiciary. But before starting this 4th pillar in that structure of the NIS methodology, I suggest to have a 5-minute break so people can grab a glass of water, stretch their legs just for a moment before we continue by looking at those law enforcement agencies. So on my watch, it's 5 to 4, so probably it's 5 to 11 in Aruba. Deborah, is it okay if we continue at 11?
Yes, it is. So I'll see everyone back in 5 minutes.
Perfect. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
So from here, we are going to shift our attention to the 4th pillar in that structure of the NIS, the law enforcement agencies. And the first problem which we have to tackle is to find a definition for law enforcement agencies, because that NIS methodology leaves some room for discussion there. And that doesn't have to do with that first part, agencies which enforce the laws. So if you take NIS studies from other countries, you will see that attention is paid to the public prosecution there, and also attention to the police. But that discussion may arise when we have a look at the second intent, agencies that actively and directly assist in the enforcement of laws. So then there we can find a broad variety of agencies, of bodies that actively and directly assist in enforcement of laws. There I would like to bear in mind that in Aruba you have a code of criminal procedure which was altered in 1997, if I'm correct, where the position of the police was more or less simplified. There where the police was ordered to focus on the primary tasks, so the enforcement of the legal order, and to give assistance to those who need it, which you can read in your national ordinance of the police, leaving room for other entities to enforce and also to assist in the enforcement of the laws. So we have to make choices from that broad variety of institutions that might play a role in this field. And for now, we limited the law enforcement to those 5 agencies, as you can see on the bottom of this page. Of course, your local police, so the Aruba Police Force, KPA. With that, the Special Police Force Aruba, the Landsrecherche. This entity investigates possible criminal conduct of government officials and civil servants. But we also have a look at the Special Police Task Force, RST, which stands for het Recherche Samenwerkingsteam. So that's a cooperation which aims at combating serious cross-border crime and crime which infringes the legal order. As I said, the Public Prosecutor's Office Aruba, so het Openbaar Ministerie, plays a role within this pillar. And the amount of work for the Public Prosecutor's Office, it's tremendous. They have to enforce legislation, but they are also in charge of the detection and prosecution of criminal offenses, but also the execution of criminal judgments. The last agency which we are going to have a look at during our study is your customs authority. And that, of course, has to do with the fact that you are an island close to Venezuela, surrounded by the sea. So we have an important role for your customs authority that has to oversee import and export and the transit of cross-border goods, raising and collecting customs and excise, but also really important, the enforcement of rules in the field of, as it calls, VGGM, in Dutch, veiligheid, gezondheid, economie en milieu, so safety, health, economy and environment. Deborah, next slide, please. That is a polling question, and we are going to focus on one of the agencies, KPA. And my question to you is the following. The Aruba Police Force has sufficient resources to operate effectively in practice.
10 more seconds.
So here we can see that the majority of the attendees are let me have a look. Yeah, E, that's the choice of the majority of the attendees. So the above mentioned resources and infrastructure, so the human and financial resources and infrastructure are lacking. Thank you. Well, to be honest, for me, this is a desired outcome, because what I would like to do is to explain my research, the research of the group thus far in this pillar, so the law enforcement agencies. And from there, can you take it one step back, Deborah, please? Yeah. Thus far, because of the circumstances Willeke describes by the start of this webinar, we have been restricted in doing our research. It was mainly desk research thus far. So reading and studying the relevant national ordinances and decrees, some reports, for instance, the report of the Algemene Rekenkamer and the Central Bank, some important studies of WODC, and one I really would like to mention, the dissertatie of Ms. Schotborg van de Ven. But the practical side was lacking completely. So we called for input, because in that NIS methodology, it is about theory and practice. So we are delighted that we received a letter of your Prime Minister, Ms. Wever-Kroes, by the end of last month, in which she makes it possible for us to have interviews with representatives of those agencies. We experienced some hesitation at the side of the representatives of these agencies. They were patient, and they were asking our patience as well, because the formal side in this project wasn't fully up to date by that stage. Ms. Wever-Kroes, apologies, Ms. Wever-Kroes, the weather here is horrendous, so that's why I just peeked over my shoulder. Hopefully it's better in Aruba at the moment. Ms. Wever-Kroes understood that interviews with the relevant stakeholders is absolutely necessary to grasp the Aruban practice. So we are going to shift our attention once more to KPA, and there I will try to give you an impression about doing research on the basis of desk research alone, because that for this pillar, I like to stress that it's just this pillar, law enforcement agencies, where the input from, let's say, the institutions was limited thus far. So from there, it's impossible to come to any sort of results. If we have a look at that NIS methodology, and we are focusing on this one pillar, law enforcement agencies, Willeke explained that we are trying to find answers to several questions to describe that pillar from several angles. So the angle of capacity, governance, and role. So if we just have a look at this pillar, law enforcement agencies, and we are going to focus on one institution, KPA, and we are going to focus on one item of that capacity objective, then the main question there on the basis of that NIS methodology is the following. To what extent does KPA have adequate levels of financial resources, staffing, and infrastructure to operate effectively? So exactly the same question as I was asking you a minute ago. So that question from the poll, I tried to answer on the basis of desk research. So I like to share my first results. I will refer to them as indicators because I found some indicators that were contradictory. So starting off with the state budget. Well, it's determined by your Minister of Justice in accordance with the Minister of Finance. And from there, I was looking for annual reports on the site of KPA. And in the situation where I wouldn't find that one, the annual report of the Ministry of Justice, Security and Integration, the Ministry of Finance, Economic Affairs and Culture, perhaps. But from there I continued, of course. So if we turn to the next slide. I found research of your Court of Audit, de Algemene Rekenkamer van Aruba. They have been researching, they were conducting a research on overtime, because that is a problem which is threatening every budget, overtime. So that research was looking at the reasons for overtime within 3 organizations, and one of them, KPA, I was especially interested in. And the conclusion towards KPA in that research of the Court of Audit was that KPA was performing several tasks, many tasks, and they were regarded often as, in Dutch, it were oneigenlijke taken. So if I refer back to that Code of Criminal Procedure, where the tasks for your local police or for KPA are straightforward, the enforcement of the legal order and to give assistance to those who need it. Here was found out that KPA was also involved in sports games, and all kinds of public activity where they were obliged to go to make sure that that public order was remained. So to take it one step back, if we see the budget of KPA, so let's say the financial resources, human resources, then the idea might be that by looking at this research of the Court of Audit, that budget was too limited because, of course, there's a lot of overtime. I also found articles in which the indicator is the other way around. For instance, the idea that the Dutch Minister of Justice and Security, Minister Grapperhaus, allocated more than 4 million euros to enhance the training of officers in the police forces, also the training of KPA. So from here to last summer, so July 2020, SPA, the main police union on Aruba, it called for a strike, and that had to do with budget cuts due to that COVID-19 crisis. So indicators that are all useful to say something about resources of one of the institutions involved in the law enforcement, KPA, but really impossible to come up with any sort of conclusion. So bear in mind that in that NIS methodology, it is always about law and practice. So in that structure, in that pillar, where we are focusing on capacity, governance, and role, we pay attention to law and practice. And of course, desk research might be helpful, but it's really about interviews that give us the important inside information. And today, the 19th of November, hopefully I can start making arrangements with representatives of the institutions that are involved in law enforcement. Deborah, next slide, please. And that is, for me, hopefully the major outcome of this webinar for today. It is really a call for input that applies for the other colleagues in our team as well. We are doing our research from great distance. So are there people who we need to speak to get a better view on topics on judiciary, but so mainly about law enforcement agencies? Maybe you are aware of interesting articles, publications. Please give us the hint so we can involve those aspects in our research as well. And also practical cases, so the couleur locale of Aruba, please share it with us. On the bottom of this slide, you can see an email address. And Deborah shared that email address with the attendees of last week. I think by last Monday. Within our institution, we have that ICT department, and they created this email address. There was a slight delay, so creating an account and opening it to the public. As far as I'm aware, it should operate. It should be functioning right now. So in the situation that you are sending us information and that information is returned, please do not question the address. So nisaruba.brr, bestuur, recht en ruimte. That is what the abbreviation stands for. So nisaruba.brr@saxion.nl.
Yes.
Willeke.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Frank. That's indeed important to underline the email address. I just wanted to mention that we've taken a note of the chat, and we are very pleased with the quality of questions and suggestions which were sent to us. So many of you who are attending this webinar have interesting backgrounds or experiences. So we will take note of that. So some questions with related to the role, some related to the resources of the police. And some of the chat questions we've responded to, some need some double checking with you, Frank, before we can answer them. But I wanted to highlight and thank all of you, because this is actually what we were hoping this webinar should have as an outcome. So the ears and eyes on the grounds, which are so so needed. So thank you very much to all of you. And we will, hopefully you will see what we have done with your feedback and suggestions. So thank you.
Yes. Now, thank you, Willeke, for that. Thank you, Frank. I believe there were two questions in the Q&A box. One is reference to specific websites, but I'm not sure, Frank, if you addressed that one already.
Probably not. But to be honest, I do not understand that question.
Yeah, neither. Maybe they can rephrase it. I think it's Ms. Malmberg.
Yeah.
But there's also one from Mary Ann de Jong, Curet. Onderzoeksrapporten Algemene Rekenkamer naar de jaarrekening van het land over de afgelopen dienstjaren. Ook relevante data, informatie, inzage, budgettaire financiële voeding van KB en andere justitiële diensten. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, probably that's a very useful hint.
Yes. And I see the chat. Now, I think we've had a another interesting presentation. I don't know if Thomas or Esther would like to add anything before we close. Thomas, unmute.
No, thank you, Deborah. Yeah. Well, we are very busy at the moment of planning additional interviews with people from the Dutch RST, from the Public Prosecutor's Office, also with the KPA. And the reason that we weren't just able to execute these interviews, so we cannot bring an enormous amount of data by respondents inside from the organizations. But we hope to do that on short term. That's what I would like to add. Frank already mentioned it, of course. But...
Yes.
So if there are any suggestions in that field about police officers, contacts, the letter covers, there is permission in all departments from government. So that means that we are, as of 2 weeks ago, able to interview everybody that is willing to participate in this research.
No, thank you very much. Now, I thank everyone who has zoomed in with us for this presentation. As I mentioned, this is the second of three sessions. Next week, Thursday, same place. We'll say same, we get a link, but same place, nevertheless, online, with the same panelists, and we'll be looking at the last findings of the first 6 pillars, if I remember correctly. I would like to encourage all of you who have not registered for next week's presentation to please do so via our website, www.uaaw, and then go to the page of lifelong learning. There you'll see Onderzoek NIS, click on the 3rd session, and you will be able to participate. Also, do share this with anyone who you think this might be of interest to. And as I've said, all videos will be made available at a later date. With that, I have nothing else to say. And thank you again for always being here with us and trying to further develop yourself professionally and personally. So thank you very much. And I thank our panelists for having another interesting presentation where the information was definitely worthy. And as you said, Willeke, I really love the interaction between the attendees and you. So thank you very much for that. And I wish everyone a pleasant morning, afternoon further. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.